The film begins by showing an older man riding his bicycle through a secluded forest. He arrives at a house located deep in the woods. When he knocks on the door, no one answers. Inside, the owner of the house, a woman, is seen doing laundry in a somewhat neglected setting. The elderly man then hears sounds coming from the cellar. He opens its door and ventures down, attempting to assist whoever might be there. As he considers leaving to seek help, he is unexpectedly pulled inside, and the story then moves forward approximately 30 years into the future. A group of students is shown participating in a camp program. All participants are instructed not to bring mobile phones or any form of communication devices. They gather for a preparatory ceremony, during which each student draws a random number to determine their hiking team. That evening, they all assemble around a campfire. 3 of them, Julik, Bartek, and Daniel, engage in casual conversation. Soon, a confident young woman named Aniela joins them and converses as well. There is also a more reserved young woman named Zosha, who sits by herself, holding a necklace while remaining quiet. The scene then shifts to an older woman who opens the door to the same cellar seen earlier. She drags a wild boar down the steps, presumably to feed something below. However, she slips and falls into the cellar. A human-like hand, covered with unusual growths, appears, and the wild boar is taken. The older woman's life ends in that cellar. As morning arrives, all the students prepare to begin their hiking expedition. A priest arrives to bless the journey. The group's guide and supervisor, Isa, leads 5 of the students into the forest. They walk for quite some time through the wooded terrain. Daniel, somewhat distracted, follows behind Aniela and is momentarily preoccupied with her presence, while Bartek, following behind Daniel, makes teasing comments. This causes Daniel to react emotionally, pushing Bartek until he falls. The group stops to attend to Bartek's injured leg. When Isa needs to clean the wound, she realizes she does not have scissors. Unexpectedly, Zosha becomes emotional and offers a knife she has brought along, surprising Isa, who wonders why a young student would carry such an item. After treating Bartek's wound, they continue their journey. Daniel apologizes for his earlier reaction. Julik steps aside briefly for personal reasons, and while doing so, he notices a disturbing odor. He finds a deer's body lying nearby, no longer intact and in a deteriorated state. The group wonders why the deer is in such a condition. Zosha quietly notices a human-like hand behind a tree but says nothing. They move on and eventually reach their first campsite. Everyone rushes to set up their tents. Aniela, who is not adept at pitching a tent, asks Daniel for assistance and then decides to bathe in a nearby stream. Night falls, and they gather once more around the campfire. Suddenly, an animal rustles in the bushes, startling them. Isa checks and finds a small fox hiding there. They then settle into sleep. Daniel, unable to rest, walks back toward the stream. While near the water, Aniela arrives, and they share an intimate moment. Afterward, Aniela returns to her tent, and Daniel remains by the stream. He briefly turns on a phone he had kept hidden. At that moment, a strange figure appears quietly behind him and pulls him away. Daniel is overcome by this presence, and his life ends in that forest. The next morning, everyone awakens, puzzled by Daniel's absence. Isa questions the group about who last saw him. Aniela mentions that she saw Daniel by the stream the previous night. Isa checks the area, finding a discarded personal safety item and a cigarette. Meanwhile, Zosha notices a blood stain on a tree. Isa instructs Bartek and Aniela to remain at the campsite, while she sets off with Zosha and Julik to search for Daniel. Julik appears fearful and somewhat burdensome to the search effort, but they proceed. After traveling some distance, they discover a rundown house in the forest. Inside, they find old photographs, including one of a pair of twins. They hear sounds from the cellar and locate an entryway to the same underground room seen at the film's beginning. Isa and Zosha descend, leaving Julik upstairs. In the cellar, they find several bodies, including Daniel's. Above, Julik becomes alarmed because the strange being has entered the house. The figure makes its way into the cellar. Isa finds an exit route and urges the students to escape first. Though she could have followed them to safety, she is distracted by Daniel's ringing phone. She tries to retrieve it to call for help. The figure, bearing noticeable growths and unkempt hair, confronts her. Isa's life ends there, and the figure tosses Isa's remains outward, shocking Zosha and Julek. The two students flee. While back at the camp, Aniela and Bartek have a conversation. Suddenly, Aniela is approached from behind by another figure, this one lacking hair, and is critically harmed. Her life ends and her body is discarded. Bartek, realizing the danger, escapes into the woods. Zosha and Julek run for their lives. Julek, fearful and vocal about his worries, slows them down. Eventually, they come upon a house occupied by an older man. He lets them inside, and they explain the situation, including the fate of their guide. Elsewhere, Bartek finds a chapel hidden in the forest and encounters the priest who had blessed them before. Bartek explains everything he witnessed. The priest has a phone but claims the signal is too weak. He tries to use a landline, insisting that it also fails due to poor reception. Bartek notices something strange when a sudden sound comes from the device. Before Bartek can fully comprehend the situation, the priest unexpectedly strikes him, causing him to lose consciousness. When Bartek regains awareness, he is tied to a chair. The priest speaks calmly but with unsettling composure. Suddenly there is noise outside. The priest steps out to check, and the figure with the hairless appearance, who had been lurking, confronts him. This being uses considerable force against the priest. The priest is then forced toward a machine designed to shred wood. It is clear the priest does not survive the encounter. Inside, Bartek manages to free himself. Upon looking outside, he notices the figure, rushes to hide inside a cupboard, and when the figure opens it, a tense moment occurs. Meanwhile, Zosha and Julek remain in the old man's house. The old man shares a story from the past. He recounts that long ago there was a family in the area, a mother with twin sons. One night a meteorite fell in the forest, and the curious boys brought the strange object home. Later, after the family fell asleep, the meteorite's influence led the twins to change in unsettling ways. In the morning, their mother found that the boys were no longer their normal selves. Terrified, she locked them in the cellar, feeding them and keeping their existence a secret for decades, until she herself became unstable. The old man, who once confronted the twins and lost part of his leg, now suggests that Zosha and Julek remain with him to stay safe. Zosha, however, is determined. She and Julek decide to retrieve Daniel's phone from the cellar and call for assistance. They have a plan. Julek will distract the figure upstairs, while Zosha slips into the cellar to find Daniel's phone. The scene shifts to one of the beings in the cellar, occupying the space where it stores its victims. It is understood that several casualties have occurred. Julek approaches the upper part of the house, knocking on the door to draw attention. As intended, the figure moves upward, allowing Zosha to enter the lower area. She recovers Daniel's phone, but at that moment, the figure returns below. Zosha is captured, and Julek rushes down to help, using a knife. Unfortunately, the knife has no effect, and Julek is subdued. The figure momentarily interacts with Julek in a disquieting manner. When Zosha awakens later, she is bound, and Julek is gravely wounded. Zosha tries to use Daniel's phone, but it is locked. She obtains Daniel's severed hand, using it to unlock the device. However, the phone's battery is depleted, and it shuts down. With Julek in critical condition, he pleads for Zosha to end his suffering. Initially hesitant, Zosha ultimately complies to relieve Julek's distress. Both beings gather together. The one with hair applies a strange substance to an injury, while the hairless one carries items taken from recent victims. The hairless figure returns to the cellar. Zosha, using her remaining resolve, frees herself by carefully working on her restraints with a knife. Instead of fleeing, she decides to confront the situation. Grasping a large blade, she ascends the steps. She finds one of the sleeping figures and repeatedly applies force with the blade until she is certain the danger is neutralized. Zosha then runs as fast as she can into the forest. At the old man's house, the occupant hears a noise and assumes one of the beings has arrived. As the door opens, the old man fires a weapon. Tragically, it is Bartek entering, and the accidental action ends his life. Meanwhile, as Zosha sprints through the woods, a police car appears. Zosha waves it down and the officer promptly stops. While driving away, the car accidentally strikes something. When the officer checks, it turns out to be the other figure, the one previously encountered. Zosha urges caution, But before the officer can understand, the figure recovers and acts against him. The outcome is fatal for the officer. Frightened, Zosha breaks a window of the patrol car, climbs in and attempts to start it. Though at first the engine will not turn over, eventually it does. The figure climbs onto the vehicle's roof, but as the car moves, the figure falls. Instead of leaving, Zosha reverses and ensures the threat is neutralized before driving away. The film does not end there. Later that night, two individuals under the influence of alcohol pass by the same location. They notice the figure who was left behind, and it appears that this figure has survived. Elsewhere, law enforcement has converged at the house where the other figure was harmed by Zosha, and the film concludes. If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe, because by subscribing you have supported me to make better videos. See you in the next video.